Hello everyone and welcome back to Shadow Man Stories. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now, let's get you comfortable and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Patricia Stonecrow, but everyone calls me Patty. I've been a park ranger at Jefferson National Forest for 15 years now, and before that, I spent 8 years as a paramedic in Richmond. People always ask why I left the city for the mountains. The truth is, after seeing so many people hurt by other people, I wanted to work somewhere the dangers were honest, where a cliff was just a cliff, not hiding any mean intentions. The Devil's Staircase Falls got its name from the way the water drops down the mountain in steps, like someone carved a giant staircase into the rock face. It's beautiful, I'll give it that. 400 feet of waterfalls tumbling down gray stone steps, each one about 10 feet high. In summer, it's a postcard. In November, it becomes something else entirely. That's when the ice starts forming in patches you can't always see. The fog rolls in thick as cotton, and the temperature drops fast once the sun goes behind the ridge. I've pulled more bodies off those rocks than I care to count. Mostly climbers who thought they knew better than the weather. The old-timers around here will tell you stories about phantom climbers, ghostly figures in old-fashioned gear who appear to help people then vanish. They say these spirits lead climbers to their deaths, getting revenge for their own accidents. I always figured that was just mountain folklore, the kind of stories people tell when they can't accept that nature doesn't care about being fair. As a paramedic, I learned that when people are cold and scared, their minds play tricks. Hypothermia makes you see things that aren't there. I've seen patients swear they were talking to their dead relatives while their body temperature dropped. So when I heard about phantom climbers, I filed it away with all the other campfire stories. My specialty is search and rescue operations, particularly the Technica. Rope work needed on the staircase. I can rappel down those rock faces in weather that would send most people running for shelter. The state police call me when they need someone pulled off the mountain, and helicopter rescue can't get through the fog. November 15th, 1979, started like any other late fall day. The weather report called for fog and dropping temperatures, with a chance of freezing rain by evening. I was doing paperwork in the ranger station when the call came in around 2 in the afternoon. "We've got 2 climbers overdue at Devil's Staircase," the dispatcher told me. "College kids from Virginia Tech. They signed in yesterday morning, supposed to be back by noon today." I looked out the window at the gray sky. The fog was already starting to build in the valleys, and I could smell snow in the air. "Any contact with them?" "Nothing. Their truck is still in the parking area." I grabbed my gear bag, the one with ropes, carabiners, first aid supplies, and the emergency flares we use to signal helicopters. My truck had chains on the tires and a full tank of gas. If these kids were hurt, they'd need help fast, especially with the temperature dropping. The drive up to the staircase parking area takes 20 minutes on a good day. With the fog rolling in, it took me nearly 40. The college kid's truck was there all right, a beat-up Ford with Virginia Tech stickers all over the back window. I could see their climbing gear scattered in the bed of the truck, which worried me. Either they'd taken only basic equipment or they'd left in a hurry. I suited up in my cold weather gear and checked my radio. The fog was so thick now that I could barely see 30 feet ahead, and the radio was full of static. I'd be on my own until I could get high enough to reach the repeater tower. The trail to the base of the falls was slippery with wet leaves. I could hear the water before I could see it, a constant rushing sound that echoed off the rock walls. When the falls finally came into view through the fog, they looked different than usual. More threatening, somehow. The water seemed darker, and the mist rising from the pools looked almost solid. I called out for the missing climbers. "Hello? This is Ranger Stonecrow. Can anyone hear me?" My voice bounced off the rocks and faded into the fog. No answer. That's when I saw the first set of boot prints in the mud near the bottom of the falls. 2 people wearing climbing boots. The prints headed up the unofficial trail that follows the rock face, the dangerous route that experienced climbers sometimes took to get to the upper levels. I followed the prints, calling out every few minutes. The fog was getting thicker, and the temperature was dropping fast. I could feel ice forming on my jacket where the mist hit it. Halfway up the first level, I found something that made my blood run cold. A piece of climbing rope cut clean through, not frayed like it would be if it had snapped under pressure, but sliced, as if someone had taken a knife to it. I picked up the rope and examined it in the gray light. It was good quality climbing rope, the kind college students couldn't usually afford. The cut was clean and recent, no weathering, no dirt in the fibers. Someone had cut this rope within the last day, maybe the last few hours. But who would cut a climbing rope on purpose, and why? I stuffed the rope into my gear bag and kept following the boot prints. They led up the wet rocks alongside the falls, getting harder to follow as the stone got slippery. I had to use my hands to keep from sliding, feeling for holds on the cold, wet rock. The fog was so thick now that I could barely see the water falling just a few feet away. The sound was getting louder, more echoey, like I was climbing inside a cave. Every few steps I'd stop and call out, but the only answer was the crash of water on stone. At the second level, I found the first body. It was one of the college kids, a young man, Prabha, Bly not more than 20. He was wedged between two rocks at the bottom of a small pool, his face blue with cold. I could tell he'd been dead for hours, maybe since yesterday evening. His climbing harness was still attached, but the rope that should have been clipped to it was gone. I checked for a pulse, even though I knew there wouldn't be one. His skin was ice cold, and his eyes were open, staring up at the gray sky. But what bothered me most was the expression on his face. He didn't look scared or in pain, like most accident victims. He looked confused, like he'd been trying to understand something right up until the end. I radioed for backup, but got nothing but static through the fog. I'd have to get higher up the mountain to reach the repeater, but first I needed to find the second climber. The boot prints continued past the body, heading up toward the third level of the falls. I followed them, moving more carefully now. If one climber was already dead, the other might be hurt and waiting for help. That's when I heard the voice. "Help me!" someone called from above. "Please, I'm hurt!" It was a woman's voice, young, scared. It had to be the second college student. "I'm coming," I yelled back. "Stay where you are. Don't try to move." I climbed faster, ignoring the slippery rocks and the fog that made it hard to see where I was going. The voice had come from somewhere near the third level, maybe 100 feet above me. "Hurry," the voice called again. "I can't hold on much longer." But something was wrong with the voice. It sounded too clear, too close, like the person was right next to me instead of 100 feet away. And there was something about the tone that didn't match the words. She said she couldn't hold on, but she didn't sound panicked enough. I reached the third level and looked around. The fog was so thick I could barely see the water falling in, to the pool below. I called out but got no answer. "Where are you?" I yelled. Silence. I searched the area around the pool, checking every rock formation, every place someone might have fallen or gotten trapped. Nothing. No boot prints in the mud, no sign that anyone had been there recently. But I kept hearing that voice in my head. "Help me. I can't hold on much longer." I climbed to the fourth level, then the fifth. Each time, I'd hear the voice calling from somewhere above, leading me higher up the mountain. But when I'd reached the spot where the voice seemed to come from, nobody was there. By the time I reached the sixth level, it was getting dark. The fog was so thick I had to feel my way along the rocks, using my flashlight to see just a few feet ahead. The temperature had dropped below freezing, and ice was forming on every surface. That's when I saw the climber. He was standing on a narrow ledge about 50 feet away, barely visible through the fog. He was wearing old-fashioned climbing gear, leather boots, wool clothes, a rope coiled over his shoulder. He was waving at me like he wanted me to follow him. "Are you all right?" I called out. He didn't answer, just kept waving. Then he turned and started climbing up toward the seventh level, moving fast despite the ice and fog. I followed him, thinking he might be the second college student. Maybe he'd found some old gear somewhere, or maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me in the fog. But as I climbed, I started noticing things that didn't make sense. The climber wasn't leaving any tracks in the mud. His boots weren't slipping on the ice like mine were. And even though he was wearing wool clothes in freezing weather, I couldn't see his breath in the cold air. At the 7th level, I caught a better look at him. He was young, maybe in his 20s, with dark hair and pale skin, but there was something wrong with his face. It looked hollow, like he was seeing something far away, something that scared him. He pointed up toward the 8th level, then started climbing again. This time, I didn't follow. "Wait," I called out. "Who are you? What happened to the college students?" He stopped and turned around. For just a moment, the fog cleared, and I got a good look at him. He had no eyes, just empty sockets, dark as the November sky. I stumbled backward, nearly falling into the pool below. When I looked up again, he was gone. I stood there shaking, and not just from the cold. What I'd seen couldn't be real. Hypothermia, that's what it was. My body temperature was dropping, and my brain was starting to play tricks on me. I'd seen it happen to other people. They'd swear they were talking to relatives who'd been dead for years. But the rope I'd found was real. The dead college student was real. And I still had to find the second one. I pulled out my emergency flare and fired it into the sky. The bright red light cut through the fog for a few seconds, then faded away. If there were any rescue teams in the area, they'd see it and know where I was. But with the fog this thick, I doubted anyone else was crazy enough to be on the mountain. I kept climbing, checking each level for signs of the missing girl. At the 8th level, I found her backpack wedged between two rocks. It was soaked through, like it had been there all night. Inside were college textbooks, a wallet with a Virginia Tech ID for someone named Lisa Chen, and a thermos of coffee that was still slightly warm. The warm coffee bothered me. If the backpack had been here since yesterday, the coffee should have been ice cold, unless someone had been here recently, very recently. "Lisa," I called out. "Lisa Chen, can you hear me?" "I'm here," came the answer from somewhere above me. "I'm hurt. Please help me." It was the same voice I'd been hearing all afternoon, but now I knew the name that went with it. Lisa Chen, probably 19 or 20 years old, a college student who'd come up here with her boyfriend, and had somehow gotten separated when he fell. I climbed toward the voice, following the beam of my flashlight through the fog. The rocks were getting more dangerous now, covered with a thin layer of ice that made every step treacherous. I had to use my ice axe to keep from sliding backward. At the 9th level, I found more rope. This piece wasn't cut like the first one. It was burned through, the ends black and melted. But there was no sign of a fire anywhere around, no smell of smoke in the air. "I'm almost there," I called out. "Keep talking so I can find you." "Hurry," Lisa's voice answered. "It's so cold, I think I'm going to fall." I reached the 10th level and swept my flashlight beam across the rocks. Nothing. Just wet stone and flowing water and fog so thick I could barely see my own hands. "Lisa, where are you exactly?" No answer. I fired another flare. This one pointed toward the rock face. The red light lit up the area for maybe 30 seconds, long enough for me to see that the 10th level was empty. No injured college student, no sign that anyone had been there recently. But as the flare died out, I caught a glimpse of something that made my heart skip. There, carved into the rock face, were names and dates, dozens of them, going back decades. I pulled out my flashlight and took a closer look. The carvings were deep, like they'd been made with professional tools. Some of the names were followed by dates from the 1920s and 1930s. Others were more recent, 1950s, 1960s, 1970s. All of them had the same thing in common. Next to each name was a single word: fell. At the bottom of the list, in letters that looked fresh, were two new names: Mike Bradley, fell 11/14/79, and Lisa Chen, fell 11/15/79. Yesterday and today. I stumbled backward, nearly losing my footing on the icy rocks. Lisa Chen was dead. She'd fallen today, maybe just a few hours ago. So who had been calling to me all afternoon? That's when I heard footsteps behind me. I spun around and saw them, a group of climbers in old-fashioned gear, standing at the edge of the level like they'd just walked up from below. There were 6 or 7 of them, men and women dressed in wool and leather, carrying hemp ropes and wooden-handled ice axes. They all had the same hollow look as the first climber I'd seen. Empty eye sockets, pale skin, faces that seemed to be focused on something far away. One of them, a woman in a torn wool sweater, stepped forward. When she spoke, it was with Lisa Chen's voice. "Thank you for coming to help us," she said. "We've been waiting so long for someone to join us." The others started moving closer, forming a circle around me. Their footsteps made no sound on the wet rocks, and their breath didn't fog in the cold air. "You're not Lisa," I managed to say. "Lisa is with us now," the woman said. "Just like Mike is with us. Just like you're going to be." I pulled out my ice axe, even though I knew it wouldn't do any good against things that weren't really there. "Stay back. I'm warning you." They kept walking toward me, their faces never changing expression. Behind them I could see more figures emerging from the fog, dozens of them, maybe hundreds. All the climbers who had died on Devil's Staircase over the years, all wearing the clothes they'd died in, all staring at me with those empty eye sockets. I backed toward the edge of the level, feeling for solid rock with my boots. Below me I could hear the water crashing into the pool, 100-foot drop that would kill me just as surely as it had killed all the others. "Don't be afraid," Lisa's voice said from the woman's mouth. "It doesn't hurt for long, and then you'll be with us forever, helping other climbers find their way." Find their way to what? I wanted to ask, but I already knew the answer. They helped climbers find their way off the mountain permanently. That's when I understood what had really happened. These phantom climbers weren't trying to rescue people, the stars. I were collecting them, leading them higher and higher up the dangerous rock face until they slipped and fell, becoming part of the ghostly army that haunted Devil's Staircase. Mike Bradley and Lisa Chen hadn't died in a climbing accident. They'd been murdered by things that were already dead. And now it was my turn. I reached for another emergency flare with my free hand, keeping the ice axe ready in case any of them got too close. The phantom climbers stopped moving when they saw the flare, their empty eye sockets focusing on it like it was the most interesting thing they'd ever seen. "What's wrong?" I asked. "Don't like the light?" The woman who spoke with Lisa's voice tilted her head. "Fire is for the living," she said. "We have no use for such things." I pulled the pin on the flare and held it ready. "Then you won't mind if I use it." The red light burst from the flare, and the phantom climbers scattered like smoke. They didn't run. They just faded away, becoming transparent until I could see the rocks right through them. Within seconds, the level was empty again. But I could still hear them moving around in the fog, circling me like wolves. They were still there, just waiting for the flare to burn out. I had maybe 3 minutes of light left, maybe 4 if I was lucky. After that, I'd be in the dark with things that had been dead for decades, things that wanted me to join their collection. I started climbing down, moving as fast as I dared on the icy rocks. If I could get back to the lower levels, maybe I could reach my truck and get out of there. The phantoms seemed to be tied to the upper reaches of the falls. I hadn't seen any of them below the 6th level. But as I climbed down, I realized they weren't going to let me go that easily. The fog was getting thicker, and the rocks were getting more slippery. Ice was forming faster than it should in November, and the temperature was dropping so fast I could feel it through my winter gear. They were changing the weather, making the mountain more dangerous, trying to get me to slip and fall just like all the others. At the 8th level, I fired my last emergency flare. The red light lit up the fog, and I could see phantom climbers on every level above me, dozens of them, standing silent and patient, waiting for me to make a mistake. The woman with Lisa's voice was at the front of the group. "You can't climb down in this weather," she called out. "It's too dangerous. Come back up and we'll help you find a safer route." Yeah, right. A safer route straight off the edge of a cliff. I kept going down, testing each handhold carefully, feeling for solid rock through the ice. The flare was starting to fade, and I could hear the phantoms moving closer. They made no sound when they walked, but somehow I could sense them getting nearer, like the air itself was getting colder. At the 7th level, my left foot slipped on a patch of ice. I caught myself with the ice axe, but just barely. Another inch, and I would have slid right off the rock face and into the pool below. "Careful," said a man's voice from somewhere in the fog. "These rocks can be tricky." I looked around but couldn't see anyone. The flare was almost dead now, just a dim red glow that barely lit the rocks around me. "Who are you?" I asked. "Name's Charlie Westbrook. the voice said. Died here in 1923. Been trying to help climbers ever since. A figure stepped out of the fog. A young man in old-fashioned climbing gear with rope burns on his hands and a deep gash across his forehead. Unlike the others, his eyes weren't empty. They were sad, but human. Don't listen to the others, he said quietly. They're not trying to help people. They're collecting them. What do you mean? Every climber who dies on Devil's Staircase becomes one of them, eventually. They lose themselves, forget who they were, and start leading other people to their deaths. It's like a sickness that spreads. But not you, Charlie Shores. Okay, his head. I've been fighting it for 56 years, trying to warn people instead of luring them. But I'm getting weaker. Every year it's harder to remember who I was when I was alive. The flare died out, leaving us in complete darkness. I turned on my flashlight, but the beam seemed weaker now, like the cold was draining the batteries. How do I get out of here? I asked. You don't, Charlie said sadly. Not alive, anyway. Once they've marked you, they'll keep changing the weather, making the rocks more dangerous until you slip and fall. Then you'll become one of them. There has to be a way. Charlie was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice sounded older, more distant. Fire, he said. They can't stand direct flame. Not flares. Real fire. Hot enough to burn for a long time. I thought about what I had in my gear bag. Rope, carabiners, first aid supplies, a small camp stove with fuel. Charlie, are you still there? No answer. When I swept my flashlight beam around, he was gone. But his advice had given me an idea. If the phantoms couldn't stand fire, maybe I could use that against them. I pulled out my camp stove and a small bottle of fuel, the kind we use to heat coffee on long searches. The stove was designed to burn clean and hot enough to melt snow for drinking water. If I could get it lit and turn it up all the way, it might give me enough protection to climb down to safety. I fumbled with the stove in the darkness, my hands shaking from cold and fear. Behind me, I could hear the phantom climbers moving closer, their voices starting up again. Come back up, Lisa's voice called. We can keep you warm. The rocks are too dangerous down there, said another voice. You'll fall for sure. The stove finally caught, a small blue flame that seemed bright as the sun in the darkness. The phantom voices stopped immediately. I turned up the flame as high as it would go and started climbing down again, holding the stove in front of me like a shield. The phantoms followed me, but they kept their distance now, staying just outside the circle of light and heat. At the 5th level, the fuel started running low. The flame got smaller, and I could hear the phantoms moving closer again. At the 4th level, the stove went out. I was in complete darkness, alone on an icy cliff face with things that wanted me dead. That's when I heard Charlie's voice one more time, right next to my ear. The ropes, he whispered. Burn the ropes. Of course. I still had climbing rope in my gear bag, synthetic rope that would burn hot and fast, hot enough to keep the phantoms away long enough for me to reach the bottom. I pulled out a length of rope and lit one end with my emergency lighter. The synthetic fibers caught immediately, burning with a bright white flame that lit up the entire level. The phantom climbers shrieked and scattered, fading away like smoke. I could see them reforming in the darkness beyond the light, but they couldn't get close to the flame. I climbed down as fast as I could, feeding rope into the fire to keep it burning. Level by level, I made my way toward the bottom, chased by things that had once been human but were now something else entirely. By the time I reached the 2nd level, I was out of rope. The fire died out, leaving me in darkness again. But I could see lights below me. The parking area, my truck. The real world where people were alive and the dead stayed buried. I half climbed, half fell down the last 100 feet, landing in the mud at the base of Devil's Staircase just as the fog started to clear. Behind me I could hear the phantom climbers calling out, their voices fading as the distance grew. Come back, Lisa's voice echoed off the rocks. We're not finished with you yet. But they were. Whatever power they had seemed limited to the upper levels of the falls. Down here, they were just voices in the wind. I made it back to my truck just as the first rescue helis Copter appeared through the clearing fog. The crew had seen my emergency flares and come looking for me. They helped me recover the bodies of Mike Bradley and Lisa Chen, 2 college students, who had come to Devil's Staircase for a weekend adventure and never made it home. The official report said they died in a climbing accident, victims of bad weather and inexperience. The cut rope was explained as damage from sharp rocks during the fall. The burned rope was attributed to Lisa trying to signal for help with a camp stove that malfunctioned. I never told anyone what really happened up there. Who would believe it? I barely believed it myself, and I'd lived through it. But I started paying more attention to the stories the old-timers told about Devil's Staircase. Stories about phantom climbers who appeared in bad weather, offering to help people find their way. Stories about voices calling for help from empty mountainsides. Stories about climbers who went up the falls and never came down. Over the next few years, I noticed patterns in the accident reports. Most of the deaths happened in bad weather, when the fog was thick and visibility was poor. The victims were usually experienced climbers, people who should have known better than to take risks in dangerous conditions. And many of them were found with equipment damage that didn't quite make sense. Cut ropes, burned gear, ice axes, bent in ways that shouldn't have been possible. I started carrying extra flares on my search and rescue missions, and I made sure to bring a camp stove with plenty of fuel. I never saw the phantom climbers again, but sometimes on foggy November nights, I'd hear voices calling from the upper levels of the falls. Voices asking for help that I knew better than to give. 3 years after my encounter, I was promoted to district ranger and transferred to a different part of the forest. My replacement was a young man named Dave Martinez, fresh out of college and eager to prove himself. I tried to warn him about Devil's Staircase, but he just smiled and nodded like he was humoring an LD timer with too many stories. Last November, Dave went up to the falls to investigate reports of missing campers. He never came back. They found his body at the bottom of the 8th level, his climbing gear damaged in ways the accident report couldn't quite explain. I went to his funeral and met his family. His mother asked me if he'd suffered, if he'd been scared. I told her he'd died doing what he loved, helping people in trouble. But when I drive past Devil's Staircase now, sometimes I see a figure in modern ranger gear standing on the upper levels, waving at passing climbers. A young man with Hispanic features and a friendly smile, wearing the same uniform Dave Martinez wore on his last day. The phantom climbers have a new recruit, and they're still collecting. I've thought about going back up there, about trying to warn Dave the way Charlie Westbrook tried to warn me. But I'm 55 years old now, and my climbing days are behind me. And deep down, I'm afraid that if I go back to those upper levels, I might not come down alive. Or worse, I might come down as something else. Sometimes on quiet November nights when the fog rolls in thick and the temperature drops below freezing, I'll get calls from other rangers reporting voices on the mountain. Voices calling for help. Voices offering to guide lost climbers to safety. I always tell them the same thing. Stay away from Devil's Staircase when the weather's bad. If someone's really in trouble up there, wait for the fog to clear before going after them. Some of them listen, others don't. The mountain is always hungry, and the phantom climbers are always recruiting. Last week I heard that they're planning to close Devil's Staircase to climbers permanently, turn it into a nature preserve with restricted access. The official reason is environmental protection, but I know better. Too many accidents, too many unexplained deaths, too many stories that don't quite add up. Maybe that's for the best. Let the phantoms have their mountain. Let them call out to empty air and lead shadows to imaginary deaths. But I doubt it will stop them. Things that have been dead for 100 years don't give up easily. They'll find other ways to lure people up those rocks, other voices to use, other tricks to play. And somewhere up there, in the fog and ice of the upper levels, Charlie Westbrook is still fighting to remember who he was when he was alive. Still trying to warn people instead of collecting them. Still holding on to whatever humanity he has left, one day at a time. I hope he can hold on a little longer. Because if Charlie finally gives in and becomes like the others, there won't be anyone left to help the next climber who gets in trouble on Devil's Staircase. And there's always a next climber. The mountain makes sure of that. My name is Daniel Ashford, and I've been a park ranger for 13 years. 13 years of walking these mountains, knowing every trail and cave system in a 50-mile radius around Spruce Knob. 13 years of listening to old-timers tell stories about hollow men that walk the high peaks when the fog rolls in thick. I always figured those were just mountain tales, the kind of stories coal miners used to tell their kids to keep them away from the old shafts. Ghost stories born from tragedy and too much whiskey on cold nights. I was wrong. It was late October 1981, and an early snow had already dusted the peaks above 4,000 feet. The spruce and fir trees looked like they'd been dipped in white paint, their branches heavy and drooping. I was working my usual patrol route through the backcountry when the call came in over my radio. "Base to Ranger Ashford, come in." I pulled out my Motorola HT220 and keyed the mic. "Ashford here. Dan, we've got 3 hikers overdue from the Spruce Knob area. Last radio contact was yesterday evening. They mentioned something about strange sounds coming from underground. 3 Virginia Tech students, Tom, Jennifer, and Mike. All experienced hikers with proper gear and emergency protocols. The kind who don't just disappear without a trace." "Copy that. I'm about 2 miles from their planned campsite. I'll check it out and report back." The fog was already rolling in as I hiked up the final slope to Spruce Knob's summit area. At 4,263 feet, it's the highest peak in West Virginia, and when that Canadian zone weather system hits, visibility drops to maybe 20 feet. The silence up there is different too, dense, like the mountain itself is holding its breath. I'd been walking these trails since I was a kid, following my grandfather who worked as a fire lookout. My father went into the mines like his father before him, but I chose the surface. Chose to protect what was left of our mountains instead of hollowing them out. The missing hikers had permits for Site 17, a flat area near some old rock formations about a quarter mile from the true summit. When I found their camp, everything looked normal at first glance. 3 tents in a proper triangle formation. Food hung correctly to avoid bears. Even a small fire pit with cold ashes. But the sleeping bags were still warm. I checked my watch. It was almost noon, and the bags felt like someone had just crawled out of them. The tents were zipped shut from the inside, but empty. No signs of struggle. No footprints leading away from camp except for a single trail that headed toward the old limestone outcroppings. That's when I noticed the silence. In 13 years of mountain patrol, I'd never heard quiet like that. No birds, no insects, no wind through the trees. Even my own breathing seemed muffled, like the air itself was too thick. I pulled out my Silva compass to get a proper bearing on that footprint trail. The needle spun in slow, lazy circles. North, south, east, west. It couldn't make up its mind. I tapped the face, thinking maybe cold had affected it, but the needle just kept spinning. "Base, this is Ashford." Static. "Base, come in." More static. My radio had 4 bars just 20 minutes ago, but now I couldn't raise anybody. I was in a dead zone, which shouldn't exist this close to the relay tower. I decided to follow the footprints. The trail led toward a cluster of limestone formations that locals called the Devil's Teeth. Jagged rocks that stuck up from the mountainside like broken fangs. I'd been past them hundreds of times, but today they looked different. Older somehow, more weathered. The footprints were strange too. They looked fresh, pressed into patches of snow and soft earth, but there was something wrong with the impressions. They seemed too light, like whoever made them barely weighed anything at all. As I got closer to the rocks, I started to smell something. Coal dust. That distinctive black powder. Smell that gets into your clothes and never comes out. My father used to come home covered in it every night, but there hadn't been any mining operation near Spruce Knob in 60 years. The footprints led right up to the base of the largest rock formation, and then just stopped, like whoever I was following had walked straight into solid stone and vanished. That's when I heard the first whisper. The voice was so faint I almost convinced myself it was just wind through the rocks. But there was no wind. The fog hung perfectly still around me, and that unnatural quiet pressed in from all sides. "Help us!" I froze. The voice came from somewhere below my feet, muffled like someone calling from inside a deep well. I knelt down and pressed my ear to the ground, nothing but cold limestone against my cheek. But as I started to stand up, I heard it again. Dan, help us. This time, there was no mistaking it. Someone was calling my name from underground, and the voice sounded like Tom, one of the missing hikers. I pulled out my topographic map and studied the area around the Devil's Teeth. According to my USGS survey, this was solid bedrock. No caves, no old mine shafts, no underground spaces at all. Just limestone sitting on top of sandstone like it had been for millions of years. But voices don't come from solid rock. I started walking around the formation, looking for any opening or crack that might lead to a cave system. The fog was getting thicker, and my world had shrunk to maybe 15 feet in any direction. The limestone loomed up out of the white like the bones of some massive buried creature. On the north side of the largest formation, I found something that made my blood go cold. More footprints. But these were different from the first set. These looked hollow, like someone had pressed a cookie cutter shaped like a boot sole into the earth. The impressions were there, but they were completely empty inside. No heel strike, no toe impression, no weight distribution. Just perfect boot-shaped holes in the ground. They led from the rock formation toward a stand of spruce trees that I'd walked past 1,000 times before. But now, in the thick fog, the trees looked wrong. Their trunks seemed too straight, too perfect, like fence posts marking some invisible boundary. Jennifer, Mike, where are you? The voice was clearer now, definitely Tom, but it was coming from the wrong direction. The hollow footprints led east toward the trees, but Tom's voice was coming from somewhere to the west, deeper underground. I followed the voice. 20 yards from the Devil's Teeth, I found something that shouldn't exist. A hole in the ground about 3 feet across, perfectly round, disappearing straight down into darkness. My map said this area was solid rock, but I was staring into what looked like a natural chimney leading deep into the mountain. I pulled out my flashlight and shined it down the hole. The beam seemed to get swallowed up after about 30 feet. I couldn't see the bottom. Tom, can you hear me? Dan, we're down here. We can't find the way out. His voice echoed up from somewhere far below. Too far. The hole was maybe 30 feet deep according to my flashlight, but Tom sounded like he was calling from the bottom of a mine shaft. I had climbing rope in my pack, but something told me not to go down there. Not yet. I needed backup, proper equipment, maybe even a cave rescue team. This was way beyond a standard search and rescue operation. I tried my radio again, still nothing but static. That's when I heard Jennifer's voice. Dan, please help us. It's so dark down here and we can hear them coming. Hear who coming? I called down the hole. The miners, she said. They want us to stay. They say we can help fill the empty places. Empty places. The phrase sent ice water through my veins. My grandfather used to tell stories about the old coal mines, about how some of them were never properly sealed after accidents, about how the families of dead miners sometimes heard voices calling from inside the mountain, asking for help with work that would never be finished. I pulled out my emergency whistle and gave 3 sharp blasts. The sound disappeared into the fog like it had been absorbed by cotton. No echo, no return. Just silence. Then I heard Mike's voice. Don't leave us, Dan. We found something down here. Something amazing. You have to come see. But Mike's voice wasn't coming from the hole. It was coming from behind me. I spun around, flashlight beam cutting through the fog. Nothing there but more of those hollow footprints leading back toward the Devil's Teeth, leading in a perfect circle. That's when I realized the horrible truth. I was surrounded. The fog had turned into a living thing. It moved wrong, flowing uphill when it should have rolled down, curling around me in spirals that had nothing to do with wind or weather. And in that unnatural mist, I started to see shapes. They looked like people at first glance, standing between the trees, just at the edge of my vision. But when I turned my flashlight on them directly, there was nothing there. just fog and shadow and the feeling that I was being watched by things that shouldn't exist. "Dan, we're getting cold down here," Jennifer's voice again, but now it was coming from my left. Then Tom's voice from my right asking me to hurry up. Then Mike from behind me saying they'd found something wonderful in the dark. But their voices were wrong, too flat, like someone reading words off a page instead of speaking from fear or pain. I started back toward their campsite, moving as fast as I dared in the thick fog. If I could get to higher ground, maybe my radio would work. Maybe I could call for backup and proper cave rescue equipment. But the trail was gone. I'd walked that path hundreds of times. I could follow it blindfolded. But now my flashlight beam showed nothing but unmarked forest floor and those horrible hollow footprints leading in every direction like some kind of twisted maze. My compass was still spinning uselessly. My GPS unit showed impossible readings, elevations that put me sometimes underground, sometimes floating in midair. All my technology was failing at once, like the mountain itself was rejecting anything modern. That's when I heard the singing. It was faint at first, just a low humming that seemed to come from the ground beneath my feet. But as I stood still and listened, it resolved into actual words. An old mining song my grandfather used to sing. "Down in the dark where the coal seams run, we dig till the day is done. But when the mountain takes its due, the darkness comes for me and you." The voices were men's voices, rough and tired. A whole chorus of them, singing in perfect harmony somewhere far below my feet. But the song was wrong. The words I remembered ended with, "We'll see the morning sun." These voices were singing something different, something hopeless. I started walking faster, trying to get away from that underground choir. But no matter which direction I went, the singing followed me. And with each step, those hollow footprints in the ground seemed to get deeper and more numerous. Then I saw her, a figure standing perfectly still about 30 feet ahead of me, definitely human-shaped, wearing what looked like hiking gear. For a moment, my heart jumped with relief. "Jennifer, thank God! Are you okay?" But when I got closer, my blood turned to ice water. It was Jennifer. Same blonde hair, same blue jacket she'd been wearing in the photo on her missing person report. But I could see right through her. Her body was there, but not there. Like looking at someone through frosted glass. And inside her chest, where her heart and lungs should be, there was nothing but empty space. She turned to look at me, and I saw that her eyes were just hollow sockets, dark holes that seemed to go on forever. "We're not lost anymore, Dan," she said, in that flat, wrong voice. "We found where we belong, down in the empty places." I stumbled backward, raising my flashlight like it was some kind of weapon. The beam passed right through her, casting no shadow on the trees behind. "You're dead," I whispered. "Not dead," she said, taking a step toward me. "Empty. There's a difference, and we're so tired of being empty." That's when I saw the others. Tom stepped out from behind a tree to my left. Mike emerged from the fog on my right. All of them translucent, all of them with that terrible hollow darkness where their insides should be. And they weren't alone. Behind them came other figures, dozens of them. Men in old-fashioned work clothes, their faces black with coal dust. They moved in a shambling line, pickaxes and shovels in their transparent hands. Some of them were missing arms or legs. Others had their skulls caved in, dead miners. The men who'd died in the cave-ins and explosions that closed the old shafts, still carrying their tools, still looking for work to do. 47 of us died in the big collapse, said a voice from the front of the group, an older man with a gray beard and kind eyes. September 15th, 1923. We were so close to finishing our shift when the mountain came down. "The work's not done," said another miner. "Can't rest till the work's done." "But we can't do it alone," said the first man. "We need help. We need the living to fill the empty places." Jennifer took another step toward me, her hollow eyes fixed on my face. "It doesn't hurt, Dan. It's just like going to sleep. And when you wake up, you'll understand. You'll know what needs to be done." I turned and ran. I crashed through the forest blind, branches whipping across my face, roots catching my boots. Behind me, I could hear them coming. Not footsteps exactly, but something worse. The sound of empty spaces moving through solid matter. And my flashlight beam bounced wildly as I ran, showing me glimpses of things that couldn't be there. More hollow footprints, trees with no shadows, and everywhere that smell of coal dust getting stronger and stronger. I tripped over something and went down hard, my flashlight spinning away into the fog. In the brief moment before it came to rest, the beam swept across something that made my sanity crack just a little bit more. A sign. Old and weathered, but still readable. Pocahontas Mining Company. Shaft number 7 authorized personnel only ESTA, 1895. But there was no mining shaft here. According to every map and geological survey, this was virgin forest, solid bedrock. The nearest mine was 20 miles away. I scrambled toward my flashlight, but a hand closed around my wrist, a hand I could see right through. Easy there, son. It was the gray-bearded miner, his grip surprisingly strong for something that wasn't entirely there. You're gonna hurt yourself running around in the dark like that. Let me go! I tried to pull away, but his fingers were like steel cables. Can't do that. See, we got a problem down in the mine. Been working on it for 60 years now, but we can't seem to make any progress. He gestured toward where my flashlight beam showed a hole in the ground that definitely hadn't been there a moment ago. A square opening lined with rotting timbers. A mine shaft. We need living folks to help us finish the job. Living folks with substance, with weight. I looked around desperately. The fog had cleared just enough for me to see that I was surrounded. Dozens of hollow miners stood in a perfect circle around me, and among them Tom, Jennifer, and Mike. All of them empty now. All of them watching me with those terrible dark sockets where their eyes should be. What did you do to them? I asked. Same thing we're going to do to you, said Jennifer, but her voice was anging, getting rougher, older, mixing with the voices of the miners. Fill the empty places, complete the work. The gray-bearded miner smiled, and I could see right through his teeth to the darkness behind them. You ever been in a real mine, son? Not like those tourist places with the electric lights and safety rails. A real working mine, where the only light comes from the carbide lamp on your helmet. I shook my head. It's the darkest place in the world down there. Darker than night, darker than death. And when that darkness gets into you, when it fills up all the spaces where your soul used to be, well, that's when you understand what real work is. He started pulling me toward the mine shaft, and I realized that his grip was getting more solid by the second. The more afraid I became, the more real he became. Please, I whispered. I have a family. People who care about me. So did we, said Tom. But that don't matter now. What matters is the work. Always the work. I was almost to the edge of the shaft when I remembered something my grandfather had told me. Something about the old miners and their carbide lamps. Light, he used to say. That's the only thing that keeps the darkness honest. I still had my emergency gear. In the left pocket of my jacket was an old carbide mining helmet I'd inherited from my great-grandfather. I carried it for sentimental reasons, never thinking I'd actually need it. With my free hand, I fumbled for the striker and managed to get the carbide lamp lit. Acetylene flame blazed up bright and white, and the effect on the hollow miners was immediate. They screamed. It was a sound I'll never forget. Like wind through empty bottles, like the mountain itself crying out in pain. The gray-bearded miner's grip loosened just enough for me to pull free and stumble backward. You can't stop the work, he howled, but his voice was fading. The mountain needs to be emptied. The darkness needs to be fed. I held the carbide lamp high and backed away from the mine shaft. In the bright acetylene light, I could see the hollow miner as beginning to fade, but they weren't giving up. If you won't help willingly, said Jennifer's voice, now completely mixed with those of the dead miners, then we'll take what we need. They rushed at me all at once, a wave of emptiness trying to drag me down into the shaft. I swung the carbide lamp in wide arcs, and wherever the light touched them, they dissolved like smoke. But there were so many of them, and I was only one man with one small flame. One of them got behind me. I felt hollow fingers close around my throat, and suddenly I couldn't breathe. The world started to go dark around the edges. But then I heard something that gave me strength. My own voice, calling for help. My real voice, not the flat echo the hollow men had been using. Someone was coming. Someone alive. "Dan, where are you?" It was Emma Caldwell, my partner. She must have gotten worried when I didn't report in. "Here," I managed to croak. "Stay back. Don't come near the mine." But it was too late. I heard her footsteps crunching through the snow, getting closer to the shaft, and I knew that if she fell into the hollow miner's trap, we'd both be lost forever. With the last of my strength, I grabbed the carbide lamp and threw it directly into the mine shaft. The explosion of light was incredible. Bright white flames erupted from the depths, and the screaming of the hollow miners rose to a pitch that made my ears bleed. The mine shaft collapsed in on itself with a sound like the mountain breaking, and suddenly the fog cleared and the unnatural silence lifted. I found myself lying on normal forest floor, surrounded by normal trees. My compass pointed north. My radio crackled with Emma's voice asking for my location. But I felt different, older, like something had been drained out of me and could never be replaced. They found me 3 hours later, sitting next to the Devil's Teeth with my back against the largest rock formation. Emma said I looked like I'd aged 10 years in one day, and when I caught my reflection in her flashlight lens, I knew she was right. The hollow miners were gone. But so were Tom, Jennifer, and Mike. We searched for 2 more days with a full team, but we never found any trace of them. No bodies, no equipment, no footprints. Nothing but 3 sets of ID cards scattered around the rocks, like someone had thrown them from a great height. The official report blamed a geological hazard. The area around the Devil's Teeth was declared unstable due to limestone erosion and underground voids. They sealed off the whole section with concrete barriers and warning signs. But I know the truth. 3 weeks after the incident, I was doing paperwork when I got a call from the State Geological Survey. They'd been doing ground-penetrating radar scans of old mining areas, looking for forgotten shafts that might pose safety hazards. "Ranger Ashford, we've got some strange readings from your sector. Looks like there's a massive void system under Spruce Knob. Goes down at least 300 feet, maybe deeper. But here's the weird thing. It doesn't match any of our historical mining records." I set down my pen and stared out the window at the mountains. "How many voids?" I asked. "Dozens, maybe hundreds. It's like someone hollowed out half the mountain and then sealed it up so well we never knew it was there." After I hung up, I pulled out my grandfather's old mining maps, the ones that showed shafts and tunnels that weren't in any official record. Operations that were abandoned so quickly after accidents that no one bothered to file proper closure paperwork. I counted 47 different shafts within a 10-mile radius of Spruce Knob. 47 miners had died in the big collapse of 1923. That night I drove up to the sealed area and sat in my truck until dawn, listening. Just before sunrise, when the fog was thickest, I heard it again. Faint singing from somewhere underground. The same mining song, with the same hopeless words. Down in the dark where the coal seams run, we dig till the day is done. But when the mountain takes its due, the darkness comes for me and you. I've been hearing that song every night since. And I've noticed something else. Places where the ground feels hollow when I walk on it. Trees that don't cast proper shadows. Spots where my compass spins and my radio goes dead. The hollow places. They're spreading. Last month, a family of campers went missing near Dollysods. Same story. Campsite found intact. Sleeping bags still warm. No signs of struggle. The only unusual detail was footprints that looked like they'd been pressed into the earth with no weight behind them. I didn't tell anyone about the connection. Who would believe me? But I keep my grandfather's carbide lamp with me now. Always. And I've started carrying maps that show all the old mining operations in West Virginia. Hundreds of them. Thousands of shafts and tunnels dug by men who died before their work was finished. Men who might still be down there in the darkness, waiting for help to complete their endless task. If you're planning to hike in the Appalachian Mountains, especially in the old coal mining regions, remember this. Some holes in the ground aren't meant to be explored. Some darkness is hungry, and some work is never meant to be finished. Listen for the singing, and whatever you do, don't follow the hollow footprints. The empty places are always looking to be filled. My name is Bobby Clearwater, and I've been a forest ranger for 12 years now. I work in the Cherokee National Forest in North Carolina, in a place called the Whispering Pines Wilderness. It's 30 miles of old pine trees that have been growing here for 400 years. Most people never see this place. There are no roads, no camping spots, nothing but trees and trails. I'm part Cherokee on my mother's side, though I never paid much attention to the old stories when I was growing up. I was too busy studying to become a wildlife biologist. I wanted facts, not tales. But after what happened in September of 1985, I understand why my grandmother always kept sage burning in her kitchen. That month was colder than usual. The nights felt like November instead of early fall. I was out there alone, doing my regular patrol of the eastern section. The harvest moon was coming, making everything look silver at night. During the day, the thick pine branches blocked most of the sunlight, so it always felt like being inside a green cave. I'd been tracking a pack of wolves that had killed 3 deer near the old Cherokee Trail. The kills were strange, though. The deer weren't eaten properly. Most of the meat was left behind, but the hearts were gone. Clean cuts, like someone used a knife. Wolves don't work that way. On Tuesday morning, I found the first weird thing. I was checking my trail cameras near Sitting Bear Rock, a big stone that looks like a bear resting. One camera was turned around, facing away from the trail, not knocked over by wind or an animal, turned around by hands. The screws were still tight. When I looked at the pictures on the camera, there were 17 photos of trees. Just trees. But in the last photo, you could see eyes in the darkness between the branches. Green eyes, too big for any animal I knew. I told myself it was probably just light reflecting something, maybe a piece of broken glass, but my hands were shaking when I turned the camera back around. That afternoon I was marking trees for a research project when I heard something that made me stop cold. It was a sound like crying, but not quite human. It was coming from deeper in the forest where the trees grow so thick that noon looks like sunset. I followed the sound for maybe 20 minutes. The crying got louder, then stopped completely. When I reached the spot where it seemed to come from, I found something that made my skin crawl. There was a perfect circle of pine needles about 6 feet wide, with all the needles pointing toward the center. In the middle was a deer skull, cleaned white and placed on a flat rock. Around the skull were 5 smaller rocks arranged in a star pattern. This wasn't natural. Animals don't make patterns like this, but it wasn't campers either. We were too far from any trail for that. I took photos and marked the GPS location. As I was packing up my camera, I heard footsteps behind me. Slow, careful footsteps on the pine needles. "Hello?" I called out. "Forest Service." The footsteps stopped. I turned around, but saw nothing except trees. The forest was completely quiet now. No birds, no insects, no wind. That kind of quiet means something is wrong. All the wildlife was hiding. I waited for 5 minutes, then headed back to my truck. But I could feel something watching me the whole way. Every few steps I'd turn around, but there was nothing there. Just shadows and trees. That night I camped at Ranger Station 7, a small cabin about 10 miles from where I found the circle. I made dinner on my camp stove and tried to write up my report, but I kept thinking about those green eyes in the photo. Around midnight, I heard something walking around the cabin. Heavy footsteps, but they didn't sound quite right. The timing was off, like someone trying to walk like a person, but not quite remembering how. I looked out the window and saw a shape moving between the trees. It was big, maybe the size of a bear, but it was walking on 2 legs. When it moved into a patch of moonlight, I could see it better. It looked like a person, but the arms were too long and the head was the wrong shape. It stopped and turned toward the cabin, and I saw its eyes. The same green eyes from the camera. We stared at each other for maybe 30 seconds. Then it smiled. I could see its teeth. Too many teeth. Too sharp. I grabbed my radio, but when I looked back out the window, it was gone. I didn't sleep at all that night. I sat in a chair with my back to the wall and my rifle across my knees, waiting for morning. When the sun finally came up, I found tracks in the dirt around the cabin. They started out looking like human footprints, but they changed as they circled the building. By the time they reached the back window, they looked like wolf paws, big ones. 3 days later, I got a call on my radio. 2 hikers, college kids from Tennessee, hadn't returned from their camping trip. Their car was still parked at the Pine Ridge trailhead. They'd been missing for 2 days. I drove out to coordinate the search with the county sheriff. The car was a red Honda with Tennessee plates. Inside, I found their permits and hiking plan. They were supposed to camp at Mirror Lake for one night and return the next day. Mirror Lake was only 8 miles from where I'd found the deer skull circle. The sheriff brought 4 deputies and a search dog, a German shepherd named Rex. We started hiking the Pine Ridge Trail at sunrise. The weather was still cold, and fog was rising off the lake when we got there. We found their camp right away. The tent was still set up, but the door was hanging open and everything inside was scattered around. Sleeping bags pulled out, food thrown everywhere, clothes torn up. "Bears?" asked one of the deputies. I looked closer. No, bears would have gone for the food first. This looks more like some thing was looking for the people. The search dog found a scent trail leading away from the camp. It went straight into the thickest part of the forest, where the old Cherokee Trail runs. Rex followed it for about a mile, then stopped and refused to go any further. He just sat down and whined. "What's wrong with him?" the sheriff asked. I knelt down and petted Rex. His fur was standing up along his back, and he was trembling. Dogs don't act like this unless they sense real danger. "He's scared," I said. Something spooked him bad. We kept searching without the dog. About 50 yards ahead, we found the first hiker. His name was Danny Morrison, 20 years old. He was hanging from a pine tree about 10 feet off the ground. But he wasn't hanging from a rope. He was stuck in the branches like he'd been thrown there, hard. The sheriff called for the medical examiner while I checked the scene. Danny's body was twisted in a way that didn't make sense. His back was broken, but there were no other injuries. No cuts, no animal bites, nothing. But the weird thing was his face. His eyes were wide open, but they looked wrong. They were green instead of the brown shown on his driver's license. We searched for the other hiker, Jenny Parks, until dark, but didn't find her. The medical examiner said Danny had been dead for about 24 hours, which meant he died the same night I saw that thing walking around my cabin. That night, I stayed in town instead of going back to the forest. I called my grandmother in Oklahoma and asked her about the old Cherokee stories. "Why are you asking about this, Bobby?" she said. Her voice sounded worried. "I'm just curious about our family history." "No, you're not. Something happened, didn't it?" I told her about the deer skull circle and the green eyes. She was quiet for a long time. "Grandmother, you need to leave that place," she said. "Right now." "I can't. There's still a missing person." "Listen to me, Bobby. What you're dealing with isn't natural. It's something that was once human but gave up its humanity for power. We have different names for it, but the Navajo call it skinwalker. But skinwalkers are Navajo legend. This is Cherokee territory. Evil doesn't respect tribal boundaries, and Cherokee land has its own dark spirits. Your great-grandfather used to tell stories about shapeshifters that lived in the deepest woods, things that could look like animals or people, but weren't either one. She told me to gather white sage and make a circle around myself before I slept. She said to carry a piece of turquoise and speak the protection prayer she taught me when I was little. I had forgotten the words, but she reminded me. The next morning, I went back to the forest to continue the search for Jenny. I had sage in my pocket and turquoise around my neck, feeling foolish but doing it anyway. I found her at noon near a place called Crying Woman Creek. She was alive, but barely. She was curled up under a fallen log, completely naked and covered in scratches. Her eyes were normal, brown, not green, but she was in shock. When I tried to talk to her, she just kept saying the same thing over and over. "It wore Danny's face. It wore Danny's face." The ambulance took her to the hospital in Cherokee. I rode with her, holding her hand while she told me what happened. The first night was normal, she said. We made camp, cooked dinner, went to sleep. But around midnight, something woke me up. Danny was standing outside the tent, calling my name. She started crying. I went outside, but it wasn't really Danny. It looked like him, but his voice was wrong, too deep, and his eyes were green instead of brown. When I ran, it chased me, but it wasn't running like a person. It was running like a wolf on all four legs, but still looked like Danny. The doctor said she would be okay physically, but she'd need time to recover from the trauma. They also said she had been missing for 3 days, not 2 like we thought. She'd been hiding in the woods for an extra day, too scared to come out. That meant whatever killed Danny was still out there, and it was getting bolder. I should have quit right then. Should have requested a transfer or taken vacation time, but I couldn't stop thinking about that thing wearing Danny's face, terrorizing Jenny. And I kept remembering my grandmother's words about Cherokee shapeshifters. The next week, I went back into the Whispering Pines with more equipment. I had trail cameras, motion sensors, and a shotgun loaded with shells blessed by the Cherokee spiritual leader in town. I know it sounds crazy, but nothing else was working. I set up cameras in a wide circle around the area where we found Danny and Jenny. I wanted to know what was moving through those woods at night. The first few nights were quiet. Then I started getting strange photos. Animals that looked normal at first glance, but something was off about them. A deer with human-like hands instead of hooves, a wolf walking on its back legs, a raccoon with green eyes and too many teeth. On Thursday night, I was checking camera 7 when I heard voices in the distance, human voices having a conversation. But we were 20 miles from the nearest road and no one else was supposed to be out there. I followed the sound through the trees. The voices were coming from the clearing where I'd found the deer skull circle. As I got closer, I could make out words. "Bobby's getting too close," said one voice. It sounded like my own voice. "We should take him tonight," said another voice. This one sounded like Danny Morrison. I crept closer and peered through the trees. In the clearing, I saw 3 figures sitting around a small fire. One looked like me, but the movements were wrong, too fluid like water instead of muscle and bone. One looked like Danny, even though Danny was dead and blood. Ride. The third one looked like Jenny, but with green eyes. They were planning to kill me. I backed away slowly, but stepped on a fallen branch. It cracked loudly. All 3 figures stopped, talking, and turned toward my hiding spot. Their necks moved too far, like owls. "Bobby," said the one that looked like me, "come join us." I ran. I could hear them following me, but not with footsteps. It sounded like animals crashing through the underbrush, sometimes on 2 legs, sometimes on 4. The sounds kept changing, like they were switching between human and animal form while they chased me. I made it back to my truck and drove straight to town without stopping. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold the steering wheel. That night I called my grandmother again. "It's gotten worse," I told her. "It can look like multiple people now. It's learning." "How many people has it killed?" "At least 1 that I know of. Maybe more." "Then it's getting stronger. Every death feeds it, makes it more powerful. Soon it won't need to hide anymore." She told me about a Cherokee warrior named Stone Bear who fought a similar creature 200 years ago. He couldn't kill it with weapons, but he trapped it using sacred symbols and protective ceremonies. "Do you remember the binding ritual I taught you when you were 12? I did remember. She had made me learn it, saying it was for emergencies. At the time, I thought she was just preserving old traditions. Now I understood she was preparing me for something like this. The ritual required sage, tobacco, turquoise, and something that belonged to the creature. It also required courage, because I would have to get close enough to trap it in a sacred circle while speaking the binding words. "If you do this wrong, it will kill you," she warned me. "But if you do nothing, it will kill others. The choice is yours." I spent the next day gathering what I needed and preparing for what might be my last night in the Whispering Pines. I drew sacred symbols on my skin with blessed paint and filled a bag with white sage and tobacco. And I wore 3 pieces of turquoise and carried a knife that had belonged to my Cherokee great-grandfather. Most importantly, I had something that belonged to the creature, a piece of torn fabric from Danny's shirt that I'd found near his body. The creature had been wearing Danny's form when it tore the shirt. At sunset, I drove back into the forest. I parked at the Pine Ridge trailhead and hiked to the clearing where I'd seen the 3 figures. I wanted to face this thing where it felt strongest. The clearing looked different at night. The deer skull was gone, but there were new symbols carved into the trees. They hurt to look at, like they were designed to cause pain to human eyes. I built my own fire in the center and arranged the sacred items in a circle around it. Then I sat down and waited. I didn't have to wait long. It came out of the trees looking like my father, who had been dead for 10 years. It was a cruel choice. My father had died when I was 25, and I still missed him every day. "Hello, son," it said in my father's voice. "I've been waiting for you. You're not my father, aren't I? I know everything he knew. I have all his memories, all his love for you." It moved closer, and I could see the green eyes shining in the firelight. Even wearing my father's face, the eyes gave it away. "I know you missed me," it continued. "I know you blamed yourself for not being there when I had the heart attack. That hurt, because it was true. But I remembered my grandmother's words about the creature learning from its victim's fears and guilt. My father would never use my guilt against me," I said. "He was a good man." The thing's expression changed. The fake kindness fell away, and I saw the hatred underneath. "Your father was weak," it snarled. "Just like you, just like all humans." It began to change. My father's face melted away like wax, replaced by something that had never been human. The body stretched and twisted, growing claws and too many teeth. The green eyes multiplied until there were 6 of them, glowing like emeralds. "I am older than your people," it said in a voice like breaking glass. "I was here before the Cherokee, before any human walked these mountains. I will be here when all of you are gone." I started speaking the binding words my grandmother had taught me. The creature laughed at first, but then its expression changed to anger, then fear. The sacred circle I had drawn began to glow with soft silver light. The creature tried to step backward, but the light followed it, forming walls of energy around us both. "You cannot hold me," it screamed. "I am eternal." But the binding was working. The creature's form became less solid, like smoke instead of flesh. I could see through it to the trees behind. That's when it made its final attack. Instead of coming at me with claws and teeth, the creature attacked my mind. Suddenly, I was seeing everyone I had ever lost. My father, my grandmother's sister, my college girlfriend who died in a car accident. They were all standing around the fire, telling me how disappointed they were in me. "You let us die," said my father. "You never loved us enough," said the others. The voices were so real, so full of pain and accusation, that I almost stopped the binding ritual. My voice faltered, and the silver light dimmed. The creature sensed weakness and pressed harder. Now I was seeing my own death in a dozen different ways. I saw myself being torn apart by claws, crushed by falling trees, lost forever in the dark forest. I saw the creature wearing my face, using my identity to kill more innocent people. But then I remembered something my grandmother always said. The truth is stronger than any lie, no matter how beautiful or terrible the lie might be. The truth was that my father had loved me, and he would never blame me for his death. The truth was that this creature was a parasite, feeding on grief and fear. The truth was that I had a choice. I would give in to the fear, or I could finish what I started. I spoke the binding words louder, putting all my strength into them. The Cherokee language felt powerful in my mouth, each syllable hitting the creature like a physical blow. The creature's fake human forms dissolved completely. What was left was something that defied description, a mass of shadow and hunger with those terrible green eyes. It writhed inside the silver circle like a snake in a cage. "You think you've won?" it hissed. "I am bound, but not destroyed. Someday someone will break this circle and I will be free again. Maybe, I said, but not today, and not while I'm alive to guard this place. The final words of the binding ritual left my lips, and the creature's screams echoed through the forest. The silver light flared so bright I had to close my eyes. When I opened them, the clearing was empty except for the dying fire and a small pile of ash where the creature had been. But I knew it wasn't really gone. I could feel it, imprisoned but not destroyed, somewhere just beyond the edge of reality. The binding would hold as long as the sacred symbols remained unbroken and someone remembered the old ways. I spent the rest of the night maintaining the fire and reinforcing the binding with additional prayers. When the sun came up, I marked the area with warning signs in both English and Cherokee, telling people to stay away. Then I hiked back to my truck and drove home to file my final report. That was 38 years ago. I'm retired now, but I still live near the Cherokee National Forest, and I still visit the Whispering Pines once a month to check on the binding. The clearing is overgrown now, hidden by thorns and poison ivy. Most people can't even find it anymore. The forest itself seems to discourage visitors, but the sacred symbols are still there, carved deep into the old pine trees, and the creature remains trapped. Sometimes, on cold September nights when the harvest moon is full, I can hear it calling from beyond the binding. It knows I'm getting old. It knows that someday I won't be able to maintain the prison anymore. I've been training my nephew David in the old ways, teaching him the Cherokee binding rituals that my grandmother taught me. He's a good man, strong in spirit, and he believes the old stories. When I'm gone, he'll take over as guardian. The creature is still out there, still hungry, still waiting. But as long as someone remembers the old ways, as long as someone keeps watch, it will remain trapped in its circle of silver light. I named this story The Whispering Pine Skinwalker because that's what the local Cherokee elders call it when they speak of it in hushed voices. They remember the old stories, the warnings passed down through generations. They know, as I know, that some things are real, whether we believe in them or not. And they know, as I know, that the forest still whispers of ancient hungers that should never be fed. If you ever find yourself hiking in the Cherokee National Forest and you see warning signs written in 2 languages, listen to them. Some places are marked as dangerous for very good reasons. Some boundaries should never be crossed. Some circles should never be broken. And if you hear something calling your name from the deep woods on a cold September night, don't answer. Just keep walking and don't look back. My name is Thomas Ridgeback, and I've been a ranger in the Daniel Boone National Forest for 20 years. Most folks just call me Tom. Before this job, I spent 15 years as a federal marshal chasing down drug runners and moonshiners through these same Kentucky hills. I thought I'd seen everything these mountains could throw at me. I was wrong. It was March of 1984 when everything changed. The spring floods had been bad that year, washing out roads and making half the forest trails impossible to walk. That's when we got the call about archaeological thieves in Moonshine Hollow. Some college kids had been digging around the old still sites, looking for bottles and copper pieces to sell. My job was to hike in there and put a stop to it. Moonshine Hollow isn't marked on any tourist maps. It's hidden deep in the forest, tucked between 2 ridges like a secret pocket. You can't see it from the air because of all the thick trees. The only way in is through an old deer trail that winds down through walls of rhododendron bushes taller than a man. Most people don't even know it exists. I'd been there a few times before over the years. The place always gave me the creeps, but I figured that was just because of the history. Back in 1923, federal agents raided the hollow and got into a shootout with the moonshiners. 3 agents died, along with 5 local men. The newspapers said it was the bloodiest raid in Kentucky history. After that, folks started saying the place was haunted, but I never believed in that kind of talk. The morning I hiked down there to catch those thieves, the mist was so thick I could barely see 10 feet ahead. My boots crunched on wet leaves as I followed the narrow trail down into the hollow. The air smelled like pine needles and something else, something sweet and sharp that reminded me of corn mash. I figured it was just old smells trapped in the low, stone caves that dotted the area. The trail opened up into a clearing about the size of a football field. In the center stood the remains of the old distillery. Most of it had rotted away, but you could still see the stone foundation and parts of the copper still. Rusted barrels lay scattered around like old bones. A natural spring bubbled up from the rocks nearby, feeding a small creek that ran through the middle of the clearing. I stopped at the edge of the trees and listened. The forest was too quiet. No birds singing, no squirrels chattering. Even the insects seemed to have gone silent. The only sound was the gentle gurgling of the spring and my own breathing. The thick mist swirled around the still like smoke from a dying fire. Something felt wrong about the place, but I couldn't put my finger on what. I'd been in hundreds of crime scenes, and this felt different, dangerous, like walking into a room where you know someone's watching you, but you can't see them. I pulled out my radio to call headquarters. "Base, this is Ranger Ridgeback. I'm at the hollow. No sign of the thieves yet." Static crackled back at me. "Tom, you're breaking up. Repeat your location." I tried again, but the radio wouldn't work. That happened sometimes in the deep hollows where the mountains blocked the signal. I'd have to finish my patrol and report back when I hiked out. I stepped into the clearing, my hand resting on the pistol at my hip. The mist seemed to part around me as I walked toward the old still. My footsteps echoed strangely in the quiet air, like they were bouncing off invisible walls. When I got closer to the ruins, I could see fresh footprints in the mud, boot prints leading from the still toward the caves at the back of the hollow. Those college kids were here somewhere. I just had to find them. I followed the footprints toward the limestone caves. The prints were clear, or in the soft mud, 2 different sets of boots, both heading into the largest cave opening. I clicked on my flashlight and stepped inside. The cave was bigger than I expected. My light beam swept across smooth stone walls and a floor covered in dry leaves. The footprints continued deeper into the darkness. I called out, "Forest Service, I need you folks to come out and talk to me." My voice echoed back from the depths of the cave. No answer. I went deeper, following the prints. The cave split into 2 tunnels. I took the left one where the prints were clearer. After about 50 yards, the tunnel opened into a large chamber. My flashlight beam caught something that made me stop cold. There were bottles everywhere. Hundreds of them lined up against the walls like soldiers. Old mason jars and brown jugs, all covered in dust and cobwebs. Some still had liquid in them, clear as water, but I knew it wasn't water. This was a storage room from the old Moonshine operation. But that wasn't what stopped me. In the center of the chamber, someone had built a small campfire. The ashes were still warm. Scattered around the fire were modern camping gear, backpacks, sleeping bags, and digging tools. The college kids had been using this place as a base camp. I heard a sound behind me and spun around. Footsteps echoing from deeper in the cave. "Hello? I'm with the Forest Service. I just want to talk to you." The footsteps stopped. Then I heard something that made my blood run cold, the sound of a gun being cocked. But it wasn't the sharp click of a modern weapon. This was different. Older, like the sound an antique rifle makes. "You boys need to put down any weapons and come out where I can see you," I called, drawing my own pistol. "I'm not here to arrest anyone. Just want to make sure you're not damaging any historical sites." A voice answered from the darkness ahead, but it wasn't a young college kid's voice. It was older, rougher, with the thick accent of an old-time mountain man. "Ain't no boys here, revenuer." Revenuer? That's what moonshiners used to call feuillants. Daryl agents back in Prohibition days. No one had used that word in 60 years. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," I said, keeping my gun ready. "I'm a forest ranger, not a federal agent." Laughter echoed from the darkness. Cold, mean laughter. "Badge is a badge, revenuer. Y'all killed my brothers. Now it's time to settle up." A gunshot boomed through the cave, louder than any rifle I'd ever heard. The bullet whined past my ear and shattered one of the old bottles against the wall. I dove behind a pile of rocks and clicked off my flashlight. In the sudden darkness, I heard more footsteps. Not just one person, several. They were moving through the cave like they could see in the dark. I heard whispers, but I couldn't make out the words. Another shot rang out, this one from a different direction, then another. They were surrounding me, but how could they see to aim in this darkness? I crawled along the cave wall, trying to find another way out. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure they could hear it. Behind me, the footsteps kept coming, slow and steady, like they had all the time in the world. I found a narrow crack in the cave wall and squeezed through it. It led to another tunnel, this one heading back toward the entrance. I could see a faint glow ahead, daylight from the cave mouth. As I crawled toward the light, I heard voices behind me. That same rough mountain accent, but now there were several of them talking at once. "He's running like a scared rabbit. Let him go. He'll be back. They always come back." I reached the cave entrance and stumbled out into the misty clearing. My hands were shaking as I holstered my gun. This didn't make sense. College kids didn't talk like old-time moonshiners. They didn't have antique rifles, and they sure didn't know how to move through pitch-black caves like they owned the place. I looked back at the cave entry. Ants. Nobody followed me out. The hollow had gone quiet again, except for the spring bubbling and the mist swirling around the old still. I checked my watch. I'd only been in the cave for 20 minutes, but it felt like hours. The mist seemed thicker now, and the temperature had dropped. I could see my breath. Something was very wrong here. This wasn't about college kids stealing artifacts. Whatever was in that cave was something else entirely. I tried my radio again. Still, nothing but static. I was on my own until I could hike back to where the signal worked. As I started toward the trail that led out of the hollow, I heard something that made me freeze. Music. Fiddle music, playing a slow, sad tune. It was coming from the direction of the old still. I turned around and saw them. 3 men in old-fashioned clothes were standing around the still. They wore suspenders and wool pants and boots that looked like they'd been made by hand. Their faces were pale as moonlight, and I could see right through them to the mist beyond. One of them looked directly at me and tipped his hat. Then they faded away like smoke, leaving only the echo of that fiddle music hanging in the air. I ran for the trail and didn't look back. I made it halfway up the trail before I stopped running. My chest was burning and my legs felt like rubber. I leaned against a tree and tried to catch my breath, looking back down toward the hollow. The mist had gotten so thick I couldn't see the clearing anymore. What I'd seen down there wasn't possible. People don't just appear and disappear like that. And those gunshots, they'd sounded real enough. The bullets had shattered glass and chipped stone, but the men firing them... I shook my head. 20 years of law enforcement had taught me to trust facts, not feelings. There had to be a logical explanation. Maybe some local troublemakers were playing games, trying to scare people away from their private still operation. Maybe they had some kind of projection equipment hidden in the mist. But even as I thought it, I knew it didn't add up. I stamped. We're hiking again, but slower this time. I needed to get back to headquarters and report what I'd found. The sheriff's department could send a team with better equipment to search those caves properly. That's when I heard the screaming. It came from somewhere below me, back in the direction of the hollow. A man's voice, high and terrified, screaming words I couldn't understand. Then another voice joined in, and another. I grabbed my radio. Base, this is Ranger Ridgeback. I need backup at Moonshine Hollow immediately. Shots fired, people in distress. Nothing but static. The screaming got louder. Then I heard gunshots again. Lots of them, like a whole battle was going on down there. The sounds echoed off the ridges around the hollow, making it impossible to tell exactly where they were coming from. I had to go back. If there were people in trouble down there, I couldn't just leave them. It went against everything I'd sworn to do as a ranger. I turned around and headed back down the trail, my gun drawn and ready. The mist seemed to be rising up from the hollow like steam from a pot. By the time I reached the clearing again, I could barely see 20 feet in any direction. The gunfire had stopped, but now I could hear voices, men talking in low, urgent tones. I crept to the edge of the tree line and listened. "Got both of them," someone said. "City boys shouldn't have come poking around where they don't belong." "Throw 'em in the cave with the others," another voice replied. "Let the rats have 'em." My blood went cold. They were talking about the college kids, the ones who'd been digging around the site, and they mentioned others. I moved carefully around the edge of the clearing, trying to get closer without being seen. The mist was so thick it was like moving through a cloud. I could hear the men, but I couldn't see them. Then the mist parted for just a moment, and I saw something that made me doubt my own eyes. There were 6 men standing around the old still. They wore clothes from the 1920s, suspenders, work shirts, and old-fashioned hats. But I could see right through them, like they were made of fog. Their faces were pale and drawn, with dark shadows where their eyes should be, and at their feet lay 2 bodies. Young men in modern clothes, jeans and hiking boots and college sweatshirts. They weren't moving. One of the ghost men looked up and saw me watching. He pointed a transparent finger in my direction. "There's another one," he said, "the revenuer with the badge." They all turned toward me at once. Their faces were terrible, not quite human anymore, twisted by years of anger and hate. Some had bullet holes in their chests. Others had wounds that looked like they'd been made by axes or knives. "You killed us 60 years ago," the first one said. "Shot us down like dogs for making honest whiskey. Now it's our turn." They started walking toward me, their feet making no sound on the wet leaves. I fired 3 shots into the center of the group. The bullets passed right through them and struck the still behind with loud clangs. The ghosts laughed. It was the worst sound I'd ever heard, like wind blowing through a graveyard. I ran. I crashed through the rhododendron bushes at the edge of the clearing, not caring about the thorns that tore at my clothes. Behind me, I could hear them following, not running. They didn't need to run. They moved through the forest like they were part of it, flowing around trees and rocks like water. "Can't leave the hollow, revenuer," one of them called after me. "Not until you pay for what you've done." I reached the trail and started climbing as fast as I could. My lungs were burning and my heart was hammering against my ribs. The mist followed me up the slope, getting thicker instead of thinner as I climbed. That's when I realized what was happening. The mist wasn't natural weather. It was coming from them. They were using it to trap me in the hollow, the same way they'd too, wrapped those college kids. I could hear them getting closer. Their voices echoed through the trees around me, coming from all directions at once. "Ain't nowhere to run. Hollow's got you now. Time to pay the blood debt." The trail ahead of me disappeared into solid white mist. I couldn't see where I was going anymore. I might be walking in circles, heading right back toward the clearing, or I might be walking off a cliff. I stopped and tried to think. These things, whatever they were, had been protecting this hollow for 60 years. They'd killed those college kids, and now they wanted to kill me. But why? What had I done? Then I remembered. I was wearing my ranger uniform, dark green shirt, badge on the chest. To them, I looked just like the federal agents who'd raided their still in 1923. I heard footsteps behind me on the trail, slow, steady footsteps that seemed to shake the ground. I looked back and saw a shape moving through the mist, tall and broad, wearing an old-fashioned hat. "Time to face the music, revenuer," the shape said. "Just like your friends did all them years ago." I backed away from the figure in the mist, but there was nowhere to go. The trail behind me had vanished into white fog, and I could hear more footsteps approaching from that direction. They had me surrounded. The tall ghost stepped closer, and I could see his face clearly now. Half of it was gone, blown away by a shotgun blast. The remaining eye glowed like a coal in the darkness. "Name's Ezra Whitman," he said. "Was making honest corn liquor in these hills when your boys came calling in 1923. Shot me down right there by my own still." "I wasn't there," I said, backing against a tree. "That was 60 years ago. I was just a kid." "Badge is a badge," Ezra replied. "Federal, state, don't matter none. Y'all been hunting us mountain folk for generations. Time someone hunted back." Reshapes emerged from the mist around me. 6 men total, all bearing the wounds that had killed them. One had an axe buried in his chest. Another clutched a rifle with a broken stock. They formed a circle around me, their ghostly faces filled with decades of rage. "We've been waiting," one of them said, "protecting our home from government men like you. Every few years someone comes poking around. Archaeologists, revenue agents, Park Service folks. They all learn the same lesson." "What happened to the college kids?" I demanded. Ezra smiled with half a mouth. They're keeping the rats company in the cave, along with the others who came before them. The circle tightened. I could feel the cold radiating off their ghostly forms. My breath came out in white puffs, and frost was forming on my uniform. "But you're different," Ezra continued. "You got the look of a lawman about you. A real one. That makes you special. Your death's gonna feed us for years to come." I tried to think of something, anything that might save me. These weren't just ghosts. They were spirits bound to this place by violence and hatred. But every supernatural story I'd ever heard said that spirits had rules they had to follow, weaknesses. "You can't leave the hollow," I said. "That's why you let me run before. You're trapped here just like I am." "Smart man," Ezra said. "We're bound to this place by blood and bullets. Can't cross running water, can't go past the ridge lines, but inside the hollow, we're the law." "Then let's settle this the old way," I said, surprising myself with the words. "Man to man, you and me." The ghosts looked at each other. Some nodded, while others shook their heads. "What kind of settling?" Ezra asked. I thought fast. "You said I was a real lawman, then treat me like one. Give me a fair chance to arrest you for the murders of those college kids. If I win, you let me and their bodies go. If you win, you can have me." Ezra laughed. "Arrest a dead man? How you gonna do that, revenuer?" "Same way the law dealt with you before," I replied. "By destroying what you are protecting." I pointed toward the hollow, where the mist was thickest around the old still. "That's what's keeping you here, isn't it? Your precious still. It's not just where you died. It's what you died for." The temperature around me dropped even further. Ice crystals formed on the tree branches above us. "You wouldn't dare," Ezra snarled. "Try me," I said. "I've got enough explosive charges in my pack to turn that still into scrap metal. One way or another, I'm finishing what those federal agents started." It was a bluff. I didn't carry explosives on routine patrols, but they didn't know that. The ghosts moved closer, their forms becoming more solid as their anger grew. I could actually feel them now, cold hands grabbing at my arms, icy breath on my face. "Kill him now," one of them hissed. "Don't let him near the still." But Ezra held up a hand. "No, he's got backbone. I'll give him that. Let's see if he's got more than talk." The circle of ghosts parted, leaving a clear path back toward the clearing. "Go on, revenuer. Show us what kind of man you really are." I walked through the opening, feeling their cold eyes on my back. This was either the stupidest thing I'd ever done, or the only smart move left. Either way, I was committed now. The mist thinned as we approached the clearing, like they wanted me to see clearly what I was up against. The old still stood in the center, its copper pipes gleaming despite decades of weather. Around its base, the stone foundation formed a perfect circle. "There she is," Ezra said behind me. "Built her with my own hands in 1919. She's made more good corn liquor than any still in Kentucky, and she's made more ghosts, too." I could see what he meant. The ground around the still was different, darker, like it had been stained with something. Blood, probably. From the shootout in 1923 and from everyone who'd died here since. "Beautiful work," I admitted, shame to destroy it. I walked closer to the still, examining the copper pipes and the stone base. The ghosts followed, maintaining their circle around me. They were solid now, no longer see-through, as solid as they needed to be to kill me. "Of course, there's one problem with your plan," I said casually. "What's that?" Ezra asked. I spun around and fired my pistol directly into one of the copper pipes. The bullet punched through the metal with a loud clang, and clear liquid began pouring out onto the ground. I lied about the explosives. The ghosts roared in fury and rushed toward me, but as the liquid from the still soaked into the stained ground, they began to flicker like candle flames in the wind. I fired again, putting another hole in the main chamber of the still. More liquid poured out, the spiritual essence that had been keeping them anchored to this world. 60 years of moonshine, I shouted over their angry wails. That's what's been feeding you, but every still runs dry eventually. The ghosts were fading fast as the last of the spiritual moonshine drained from the still. Ezra made one final lunge at me, his ghostly hands passing through my throat like cold wind. Then he dissolved into mist and was gone. The others followed quickly, 6 angry spirits dissipating into the morning air like smoke from a dying fire. In seconds, I was alone in the clearing with nothing but the sound of liquid dripping from the bullet holes in the still. The mist lifted as suddenly as it had appeared. Sunlight streamed down through the trees and I could hear birds singing again. The oppressive weight that had been pressing down on the hollow was gone. I checked my radio. "Base, this is Ranger Ridgeback. Do you copy?" "Tom, we've been trying to reach you for hours. What's your status?" "I need search and rescue at Moonshine Hollow. 2 bodies in the limestone cave system. And contact the sheriff. This is now a crime scene." It took the recovery team 6 hours to find the bodies. The college kids were in the deepest part of the cave, along with the remains of 3 other people who'd disappeared in the area over the past decade. All of them had been shot with old-style bullets, the kind they stopped making in the 1940s. The coroner couldn't explain it. The sheriff couldn't explain it. I wrote a report that stuck to the facts I could prove, leaving out everything about ghosts and supernatural moonshine. Nobody would have believed it anyway. But I knew the truth. Those spirits had been feeding off violence and hatred for 60 years, growing stronger with every person they killed. The still had been their anchor to the physical world, powered by the same passion that had driven them to make illegal whiskey in life. By destroying it, I'd cut their connection to our world. They were finally free to move on to whatever comes next. I retired from the Forest Service 6 months later. 20 years was enough. I'd seen everything these mountains had to show me, including things that weren't supposed to exist. Sometimes I drive past the road that leads to Moonshine Hollow. The state put up a gate and warning signs after the bodies were found. The area is off limits now, supposedly for safety reasons. But on quiet nights, when the mist rises from the valleys and the moon is dark, I sometimes think I can still hear it. Faint music drifting down from the ridges, the sound of a fiddle playing a slow, sad tune. The living have long memories in these mountains, and the dead have even longer ones. End of story.